Hello, Dr. Martin.
Hi, honey.
How are you?
Good.
We're here today for another episode of The Doctor is In. So,
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well, near and far.
that's right. We want to thank all of you who have joined us from everywhere for this program of The Doctor is In, where we talk about relevant topics that affect our health as African Americans and as people in general,
Hmm.
right? Because
Hmm.
I'm sure there are lots of different people who are joining us today.
Yes.
So, today, though, specifically, we are going to talk about a very important issue. But before that, I was wondering if Pastor Williams would offer a word of prayer for us.
If he's still on.
He's on.
Pastor, are you still there?
Father in heaven, we thank you for your goodness and your graciousness. Thank you for Dr. Brian and his wife Mica and their ministry. I pray that you will bless and direct us now in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you,
Awesome.
Pastor, for that prayer. So, I didn't see my husband all day today. He was busy at
I
work.
was at work today, yes.
So, I just want to say hi and thank you for joining us, even though I know you're tired and you've worked hard all day long.
Yeah.
So, today we want to talk about a topic that's very important to us all. And this involves the mental health of our children during this quarantine and during this pandemic
Right.
and this social isolation period. This is a time, as as far as we know, we have not seen. Our grandparents have not seen it. Maybe our great grandparents have seen it, but this is not a time that we're accustomed to, where we've had to hide ourselves away
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
of the threat of not war but biological issues.
Mm-hmm.
So, so we're gonna share our screen with you, Pastor. If you can enable screen sharing for us, that would be great.
And the reason we wanted to talk about this, we actually had a few other topics planned given the Health Awareness Month. Like, for example, one of the topics that we will cover before the end of the month is women's health. Endometriosis is a topic that we'll discuss. This is also colorectal cancer month. However, I told my wife that we would be remiss if we didn't talk about this pressing issue. So, in addition to the pandemic crisis, there is another crisis that has arisen from the pandemic, and that would be child suicide. I don't know how many of you have noticed or seen the news, but near and far, we've had children as young as 10 attempting suicide and committing suicide.
Yeah.
And so we think it's a result of the pandemic. Obviously, the medical community will be doing studies, but to be honest with you, I don't really need to wait for all the studies to be done.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the studies will help figure out uh, specific factors and what we can do to prevent suicide. So clearly, we need that body of work to be done. However, there are things we can do right now. So that I wanted to make sure we talked about this crisis um, before the end of the month, before the end of the week, rather. So, so as soon as yes, so I'm gonna let you go ahead and start, honey, so you can. So everyone, I'm hoping everyone can see our slides. Yep, and then you can go to the first one. Yeah, so you may have heard in the news that we've had um, young children, teenagers, showing up in the emergency room with suicidal thoughts or ideation, it's called, as well as suicide attempts, and of course, unfortunately, actually committing suicide. So that is a major issue, um, and so we wanted to make sure we address. Angela, can you see our slide?
Pastor, can you see our slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
All
work
right.
perfect.
That's
Okay.
great. Yeah, so that's what we're going to talk
Yep.
about today. So let's talk about the scope of the
Mm-hmm.
problem. There's a pandemic going on. Um, Children, for the first time, are hearing about people dying.
Mm-hmm.
some children have never heard of death. Some children don't even have a dead grandmother, but now they're hearing this one died, this one died, my next door neighbor died, my friend's grandma died. So this is not a coincidence. This is, definitely due to the pandemic. And so this is causing them psychological trauma.
Right.
They're very upset by this. And so what are they feeling? They are feeling abandonment, not just because it's the pandemic, but it's because they're home. They're feeling abandonment. And some kids are home alone. Parents have to work. So we have kids staying home alone as young as 10 years old.
Right.
Unfortunately, for some, their parents have to go to work.
Right.
They can't
Correct.
afford to be home, even though it's a pandemic. They would love to be able to be home, but they can't be home. They feel despair. They're not seeing their friends all the time. They're seeing their friends on a screen. And there's been the problem of some children whose computers and service don't even work all the time. So now they're home. They can barely even log on, and some days they can log on, some days they can't. They're exhausted. They're mentally exhausted, mentally drained from all of this. It's been a long time. It's been a year for them. We're adults, and we feel like we can't wait to break out and go on vacation and do things. We can only imagine what children are feeling. They feel incapacitated, helpless. Like, well, what can I do about this? How am I supposed to function when all of this is going on? And on top of that, and we think because of that, there's a causal relationship between suicide attempts and suicide deaths. And the increase has happened within the past year. Between April and October alone, there were so many more hospital emergency department rises in mental health hospitalizations. People are flocking to the emergency rooms for their children. Go ahead.
If you look at NPR, there are a number of sources, of course, that we're gonna quote as references, but one good piece is from NPR. If you just Google prevention in children, NPR, and they'll tell you a story about, I guess, a school district in Nevada where they actually have had, this was from last year, 19 children commit suicide, high school children, in one school district. And so they talk about one gentleman in specific, you can see in the slide, but essentially around that time, starting around July or so, going through the summer, they had a number of suicides in that one school district related to the pandemic. So basically, once the school shut down in this region in Nevada, the kids were just, they really manifested their depression and their sadness, unfortunately, in the form of suicide. And so obviously, if you're a high school senior, you're graduating, or even if you're a junior, you're hoping to go to the prom, and obviously walking down the aisle, walking on the stage when you're going to be graduating, especially you're going to graduate with honors. This young man that they talk about in the article, it's a young man who did really well in high school, graduated with top honors, et cetera, et cetera. He was so sad about the whole about the pandemic, he didn't even go to college. He was accepted to go to college. He decided to go to work instead, and the parents thought he was doing fine, mentally, and then one day he decided to take his own life. So this is a serious issue.
Yeah, it's a sad case.
And so you're going to tell us about very briefly, about the brain psychology of what's happening, why children are even more vulnerable.
So children's nervous systems are just not mature yet.
Right.
So therefore, their endocrine system are not mature, and their nervous systems are not mature. And so there's a well-documented link between stress in childhood and how children come out later in life. Meaning, if children experience a high amount of stress when they're children, then they become dysfunctional adults.
Right.
And that is well studied and well known because of this psychological crisis, this feelings of abandonment, this despair. They become stressed out. So basically, the endocrine glands are secreting.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is secreting because of stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have children who are really messed up when they become adults. So it's a lot more complicated than what I'm saying, but you can definitely go online and do your own research when it comes to this. But this stress, this constant stress, raises the risk of depression and suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when children are stressed, one of my teachers described it as it's like, you know, seeing a bear while I'm taking a walk out here in my backyard
Mm-hmm.
and running, except when you're constantly stressed, you live with the bear.
Mm-hmm.
So you have
Mm-hmm.
that constant trigger, constant stress, constant release all the
Right.
time. So,
And remember, their brains are not mature yet, so they cannot process the pandemic and the sadness associated with the pandemic. So, as adults, I mean, it's a struggle for adults. So you could imagine an undeveloped brain trying to grasp the concept of what's happening with the pandemic, the death and destruction, as well as all the other sequelae or consequences of the pandemic, whether it's parents losing their jobs. In some cases, they're losing their homes and they're homeless. They lost their
mm-hmm,
grandparents.
mm-hmm.
They lost family members. They lost their own parents. So there's a lot of despair and sadness. And so for an undeveloped brain or underdeveloped brain, you can imagine they really can't cope. That's why we're talking about this today. And I know some of you are shocked to hear that 10-year-olds are committing suicide, but it actually is happening. So that's why we wanted to address this before more time went on.
Yes. So studies have shown that
Mm-hmm.
children who are quarantined. Oh, I wanted to say we also have Dr. Natalie March on the phone. Dr. March, you can jump in anytime you don't, just unmute yourself and speak whenever you're ready if there's something you need to speak to, because you are definitely an expert on mental health issues. We are not. So, children who are quarantined are more likely to report high depressive and stress symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
They have poor mental health and avoidance behaviors. Because they're stuck in the house, they have less physical activity, they have irregular sleep rhythm, they have unhealthy diets. I have to chase my child all the time out of the snack closet because he's home all day long in school. So of course he's trying to snack all day long. He's so then there's longer smartphone screen exposure,
Mm-hmm.
which is definitely a problem in many ways, and we all know why this is. And so because of all these things, then you have children popping up now with increased BMIs. They've been eating snacks all day long and
Mm-hmm.
food all day long, and then you also have them popping up with what we're dealing with now, sadness and depression.
Right.
So
Yep. I mean, Jonathan was a big snacker before the pandemic, and he's at risk for even more snacking. So we have to really keep an eye on him. So things you'll see. What will you see?
so with children who are a little bit stressed, you'll see increased alertness. So that's younger children,
Mm-hmm.
right? You'll have increased alertness. They're easily frightened. Let's say you have a toddler who's easily frightened. They can't focus on anything. They're irritable and they're anxious, and that looks different.
Mm-hmm.
So in all kids. So if you know your child, you know when your children are doing something that's different. So you have to be very keen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Little children will slight sounds, they'll be startled and they're just on edge all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then some kids, if they're really stressed, they'll have dim consciousness, they can't pay attention, they have decreased memory, no thinking and imagination, and they do poorly in school. School age children. In fact, I was watching a report this morning on Headline News. I was sharing with my husband on there are parents who are actually actively suing. They took it to federal courts, but they are suing school districts over states over not opening schools because their children who were perfectly healthy, happy kids are now depressed and sad and not functioning in school. They went from being an A student to being an F student. So that's the blame. Yes, Dr. Marsh.
Yes, so I agree with everything that you said, Mika. Another
Mm-hmm.
thing that you might notice, especially with younger children too,
Mm-hmm.
is that because it's sometimes hard for them to express their emotion, it comes out in a behavioral manner. So sometimes you'll see them getting in trouble more at school or just being more defiant at home, very disruptive, probably throwing more tantrums, even though they're past the age of tantruming. But, just the behavior is so dysregulated because they're feeling something, but they don't know how to, you know, accurately or appropriately express it, and it comes out this way. So that behavioral disturbance can sometimes be an indication that a child is struggling with either depression or anxiety.
Yes. When children present to you, Dr. Marsh, what are the parents saying that the symptoms are?
A lot of times it starts with the behavioral disturbance sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Other times it's just, they notice, like you said, they know their children. So if there's any change in what is they would consider their normal behavior,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it might be a regression of things that they used to be able to do before. Sometimes it's they become more fearful or more clingy to the parents.
Right.
Sometimes they don't want to be separated from them. That's a difficult thing. And then also because there's a fair number of students who have been, I guess, homeschooled, if you will, or going to remote classes. So
Mm-hmm.
they're not going into the school building and seeing their peers, or any of that social interaction may not be happening for them.
Mm-hmm.
That also affects them sometimes in different ways. They're spending more time on screens. Their sleep cycles might get disrupted. So it's it's been a challenging time for behavioral providers, because everybody is overwhelmed now because so many people are seeking help and support and trying to get back on track, which we can't really do because things are not normal anymore you know
Yeah. I can only imagine what it must be like to be a psychologist right now, or psychiatrist as you are, or another a social worker who sees children with mental health disorders. It must be really difficult. I know in my work, we've been having a hard time keeping up. This is the time when we get a lot of referrals based on whether children are getting abused now or
Mm-hmm.
not. So I work in a clinic where I do the physical part of the portion of the exam, and my partner does the psychological part of the exam, the psychologist that I work with. So we have seen an increase that is so great that they keep begging me to come to work more and more and more. I'm like, no, I have a child at home. I can't work that much. So it's definitely a problem.
Yeah.
I see it firsthand.
Not to mention, before the pandemic, I mean, for a long time, Dr. March obviously is the expert and has seen this. But a lot of resources for mental health
Mm-hmm.
patients were defunded, and so here we are in this pandemic, and we're going to have a lot of other things showing up, but this is a major one, and so we don't even have enough resources. We didn't even have enough before the pandemic, and then so now the problem is even more magnified.
Yeah. And so, the kids are not the only one affected, obviously,
Right.
right? So,
Right.
so I like this little slide
Mm-hmm.
because it defines what's happening. So you have parental stress. So parents are fighting with each other. You have parental conflict. People can't stand each other anymore. They're tired of being alone together. Just because
Yeah.
we love being home alone together, it doesn't mean that everyone does. A lot of people don't like being stuck at home,
Right.
and so they don't want to binge watch a show or a series. They don't really. If you didn't like your partner before COVID, then you are definitely having a problem during
Yeah.
COVID. So when this happens, this affects how you parent.
Or the teenager who's cooking brownies, to make themselves feel better, but then they left a mess in the kitchen,
Yeah, yeah, we
and
won't
then
call
you
them
yell at them,
names.
yell at them for that. I mean,
So then,
it's very stressful.
that's right. So there's quarrels and conflicts in the home, and it affects behavior, parental behavior, and that's just human nature.
Right.
And then it affects your child's behavior, and and then you have this cycle that's repeating over and over and over, and it's just hard. It's really hard to find a way to break that so that doesn't.
Yeah.
Um,
That's like Angela came in again.
yes. You have any comments about this, Dr. Marsh?
Um, yeah, you're right about the stress on the parents, and about the relationship too within the couple relationship, because sometimes these conditions does highlight that and creates a whole bunch of family dynamics, and everything is just coming out of the woodwork at times like this, because everybody's forced to be under the same roof. So it's problems all around, because the parents also have their own stress,
Mhm.
work related, and then with if they whether or not they send their kids out of the home for school, because then if there's like a quarantine period and that child gets sent home, they have to stay for 2 weeks. What does that working parent do then?
Right.
Do they have to stop their job, or it's a very challenging time for everybody. So
Yeah, definitely. So, what can we do? You're a big one on what can we do.
Right.
You never want to hear a problem without a solution. Sometimes there are problems that don't have solutions,
I
but
I I know that. I know
but what
that.
can we do? So, when we talk about online interactive courses, sometimes I look at my son's classes, not to criticize my son's school or anything.
Please don't say where his school is.
I'm not going to say where his school is.
Okay.
Nobody knows where I live. But his classwork sometimes is so tedious and boring, and it's just the even the interactions. You look at the interactions in the classroom, it's just not fun. The child is kind of silent all day. They're at a difficult age. They're teenagers. This is the time to engage, to be talking, to be doing things, but they're all behind a screen. They can't see each other's faces, or they lots of them, because lots of teachers don't mandate. They can't mandate that you show your face for the most part. They can try to say, oh, show your face or else, but really and truly, it's hard to enforce that. So the classes are boring, and so these kids sit in boring classes. So it's not. So teachers have to try to make it better. Churches, we can try to have youth workshops, which is what Elder Harriet is trying to do with the rites of passage, where the children will go on and learn some life skills and some life lessons and then graduate, and just trying to create little programs to keep them engaged even though they're home.
Right.
Then we need psychologists to provide online services, not only to cope with kids, but with family conflicts, with parent child tensions, with mental health problems, who are specifically trained for this. Not every psychologist is trained for this, because I'm sure the psychologists themselves sometimes are struggling because they have, and all of a sudden they're inundated. Here they are struggling, trying to keep themselves together, and then they have to try to keep all of us together too.
Right.
So the demand is high on mental health professionals, right, Dr. Marsh?
yes, that's correct.
you have, you have so we need social workers in our neighborhoods to help parents deal with those problems, and then we have to be on high alert in church and in school with single parent homes, because imagine that. Like if I didn't have you, it would be really difficult. And I know, it's difficult. If it's just me and Jonathan, that would be hard, because sometimes he gets on my nerves and I have to pass you the baton. Here, you deal with him for the next 2, 3, 4 hours. I'm gonna take a break from him. So, and you talked about primary care providers, Dr. Marsh. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Primary care providers, pediatricians, are a good first step. Actually, not even just for kids, but if adults are struggling too, that's a good first place to go,
Mm-hmm.
especially if there's like a wait list to see a psychiatric provider, um, or a therapist. Sometimes a primary care provider can, get you a referral, to see a therapist, and they can also help with any kind of medication management if that's necessary in the interim. One of my jobs is, through an agency that provides consultation to pediatricians. So the pediatricians are the ones that would then call and get advice from the psychiatrist as to how to help manage their patients, so they don't, sometimes they feel comfortable enough doing that if the case is not too complex. So, it's a good resource to utilize sometimes. So, it just broadens the field of people who are available to provide help. But if there's an emergency situation, I didn't know if you were going to bring this up,
Mm-hmm.
Mika, but always remember there are crisis hotlines that
Yeah,
you can reach out to, like 211.
I have that in the
Yes, and
back.
then some of the other um, mental health agencies, they have hotlines too that you could call more directly, like CHR has a hotline. Um,
Okay, that's
so yeah, CHR is Community Health Resources, I think.
mhm.
But different organizations have their hotline numbers that you could call to reach out, after hours. So those are good options too.
Okay, okay, and we'll repeat them again at the end.
Sure.
So what can you do? Go ahead, Doctor.
Yeah.
What can you
So, I mean, you kind of touched on some of them on Dr. March as well, but essentially, as parents, we're going to need some help as well. And so, just like Dr. March said, we can start with our primary care doctors, and if we need a referral, because if we're not well, then it's going to be hard for us to help our children. So, if we notice we're not coping well, everyone's stressed, as you know, so we should certainly get some help. Um, just someone to talk to. If you don't have anyone in the house to talk to, you want a neutral party. Good start. If you have a good relationship with your primary care doctor, you probably start with that person, and then you go from there. And then when your child comes to you, so if you get the help you need, and then you feel comfortable discussing with your child how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they come to you, it's recommended that um, let's say your child comes to you and says, I'm feeling really sad and I feel like I don't want to live anymore. I know it's hard to hear that as parents, and it's easy for me to say, react calmly, but that's exactly what we want you to do. We want you to remain calm and, listen to them well so they can, know that they have a safe place and you are going to be supportive and not overreact. Because if you overreact,
Mm-hmm.
and you get angry or sad, they're gonna blame themselves and they're gonna feel even worse. So it's pretty important that you know how to receive that information, and you want them to be able to come to you to tell you that. Okay, because if they're coming to tell you that, that's good, and that way you can prevent them hopefully from acting out,
Yeah,
actually committing suicide.
yeah. Another notes to talk.
Yes, Dr. March, go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Martin,
Yeah.
you're exactly right about that. And I wish I could say that's what happened most of the time, but mostly the parents are the last to know, not because they don't want to know,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
but I think sometimes the children, they might feel too ashamed to bring it to their parents, or they might feel, that their parents are going to be disappointed. There's just a lot of fearing that goes into why they won't necessarily reach out to the parents first. So one thing to do is get to know who your child is talking to,
Mm-hmm.
who their friends are, who the parents of their friends are, so that at least if your child won't tell you, maybe the friend will feel comfortable enough to reach out to you and
Mm-hmm.
say, hey, I got this text from your child, and then you can take it from there. But unfortunately, sometimes they won't speak up directly to you. So that's another reason to keep your eyes and ears open for any kind of change in behavior that you might notice. Maybe they're spending more time in their room,
Mm-hmm.
trying to isolate more, or just not talking to you as much about even little things, not doing anything that they normally would do for fun.
Mm-hmm.
So any change that you're not eating as well, all those things can be signs of something else going on.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about knowing our children's friends' parents and knowing their friends and having a bit. I do this little thing where my son has this little meet with his friends. I want to say almost every night, about four or five of them, they get together and they do homework together and they talk and they laugh. And I'm like, are you guys doing homework? But what I'm saying is, I make a point to always show my face,
Mm-hmm.
and I joke around with them and I say hi to them, and I might joke with Jonathan and poke him or
Mm-hmm.
do things to him. And all the children know me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I have all of their phone numbers. And I do that not because I'm texting people's children randomly, but if something happens, then
Right.
I have an access to one of them, and I can say, hey, do you know this, or do you know that? What do you think about that, Natalie? As a
That's excellent. Thanks for the tips. We'll keep
yeah.
that in mind when I need them.
Oh yeah, yeah. When your kids are, yeah, you're gonna
Yes.
be friends with your kids' friends. You gotta try to be in on it,
Yeah.
you know. So I like that little part of it. I've done that, and in the past, I don't know, like before COVID, he's never, been on the phone as much with friends. So I'm glad that he created this little friend circle where they can, and he has a different group. So he has a group where they together they laugh and they do homework and they joke, and then he has a different group that he plays video games with and
Mm-hmm.
does,
Mm-hmm.
and we've allowed a little more screen time than we would have allowed if it wasn't for the pandemic, because we just want him to have some human interaction
Right.
other than us here in this house. So
Dr. Martin, you and I, we've touched on all of these points, but
yes.
the last few points in red font I wanted to really highlight, especially for the tough guys out there. I consider myself a tough guy, not really
No,
though.
you're not.
But the point is, Jonathan is 15, my son's 15, and I've been hugging him and kissing him on his forehead more and more and more. So I know there are a lot of macho men out there, and maybe you don't, some of you hug your sons, some of you don't. If you don't, I'm not saying you don't, but if you don't, please start doing that.
Yeah.
Um, 15, he's still your child. 18, 19, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the time where you need to touch more.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they're teenagers, and in a lot of cases, some of them would have little boyfriends and little girlfriends, and they'd get their needs met. They'd be holding hands or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whatever. So they need us to touch them. My daughter, who is now 26, whenever she comes here and I see her, she doesn't live with us anymore, but I give her hugs all the time
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know if she's getting hugs from anybody else. So parental hugs are different than anybody else's hugs,
Right.
but definitely we've ramped that up. We've made a special effort to ramp up the hugging, ramp up the touching, ramp up the kissing, and I just can't say it enough. We have to touch. We have to touch.
And then if you have, once again, if you have children in the home, find games for them to play. I'm not talking about just video games. So we had a foosball table in the basement. We were not using it for a very long time. So Jonathan has a game room, if you will, where he has his video games, et cetera, et cetera. And so I brought the foosball
That's really
table.
my exercise room, by the way, but we are not going to discuss it.
So we turned it into a game room. So we have a foosball table. I even bought a game for Mica. She likes Pac-Man, so I bought a tabletop version of an arcade Pac-Man. So Jonathan can play that as well. I also bought space. So basically the point is find games, arts, craft, reading. You know, I know as parents we're pretty busy, especially if both parents are working, but make some time. This is very important now more than ever because we're talking about suicide prevention in our children, and we just have to spend more time during the pandemic. And we should continue that when the pandemic goes away, whenever that is.
That's right. Hopefully, we're
Yeah.
forming good habits. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Dr. Mark.
Yes, again, those are excellent points, and the reason why it's important to touch and hug and you know, people receive love in different ways, and it's a way of showing that you care for them more than just as them being your responsibility as their they're your child, you're the parent, but you're showing affection to them, you're building a relationship, you know by doing that, and you're also by making that time to spend with them, play games. We have started to, after Sabbath, Saturday nights, we started playing table games with our kids. So whether it's dominoes or, whatever, the kids are learning these games for the first time. They're only 7 and 9, but they're really enjoying it. But the point is that it builds a rapport with your child
Yeah.
outside of, the serious situation when you want them to come to you and tell you that they're having suicidal thoughts. If they don't feel comfortable,
Right.
if you haven't put in the effort to have that kind of relationship with your child, again, you're going to be the last one to know that
Yeah.
they're having thoughts like that.
Oh,
Yeah. And it's difficult to do all that stuff for some. I know that. I know my husband had a different upbringing than I had. They played a lot more games. We didn't play games in my family, you know. I come from a really tough Haitian family. My mother was very loving, so my love language is cooking and cleaning and making sure the house is nice, and that's my love language for my family. My husband, he loves to play with my son. He plays a lot, but I think that's because he grew up amongst a lot of uncles who played with
mm-hmm.
him, and so he's got a more. So for me, culturally, it's always like, hey, I don't play with kids. I don't play with kids. But I've had to soften my stance on not playing with kids, and I've had to play a little bit more with kids. Our 15-year-old who's got long feet still comes and lays on the bed in the middle of the father and I almost every single night. And it's annoying sometimes, but Brian always tells me, stop it, let him lay here. And he lays here, he interrupts our special time together until it's time for him to go, and he wants to lay right in the middle. Um, so definitely, we have to make adjustments. We can't be as we were.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
as we were anymore.
Right.
That has passed. And if you know your kids' friends, you can help them set up a little Zoom meet with their
Yep.
little friends from elementary school, or Google Hangout where they can watch a movie together, the same movie at the same time.
Yep.
So there are different, they probably know more than you about it, but there are different things you can arrange for your kids, but it definitely has to be intentional.
Yeah.
That whatever we're doing now has to be so intentional, and it's a little tiring, but it has to happen.
Yep.
Okay.
And everybody hang in there. Spring is around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Spring is coming. As you know, we had a couple nice weather days,
Mm-hmm.
and so this is going to present an opportunity, as you know, like we do every spring, to really get out there. So I want you to make a really special effort to get out to the park, because you can socially distance, of course, with your kids, bike riding, whatever it is. This is really this is going to be a very important spring in terms of getting out the house and getting active and trying to improve your moods.
Yeah.
So,
And if a child has had COVID, they're probably a little even more scarred than a child who has not had COVID, because they're terrified. They're not only isolated, first of all, isolated period, and now they're isolated because they have this thing that's scary to them, and so they need special attention even more so. So I wanted to say that to some of the kids who have had COVID and had to be isolated or even hospitalized, that, you know, it's hard, but your parents, your caretakers will make sure that you get that special attention that you need, especially after tonight. Do you want to talk about these hotlines, Dr. Marsh?
Um, yes, any way that you feel comfortable reaching out for help, just do it. Because a lot of times, when people voice to anyone, it may not be, it doesn't matter who it is, but if they at least voice that
Mm-hmm.
they're struggling with suicidal thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
it usually means that it's a cry for help. Like they don't want to go through with it necessarily, even though the thoughts are telling them to go through with it.
Right.
There's something in them that's still fighting to stay alive.
Yeah.
So, anything that they feel comfortable using, any one of these, and then also the 211 is easy to remember.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's also available. And sometimes 211 has a mobile crisis unit that could come to your home and evaluate someone there if
That's good to know.
necessary. So that's helpful too.
Yes, yes, that's definitely good to know. Mobile unit, huh?
Yes.
That's
so if
great.
you're watching, please write these numbers down and the information that we provided. Excuse me. And if you need more information, obviously some of our references are NPR, that we use, the CDC. You can just Google NPR suicide prevention in children, and it'll come right up. So, but please write these numbers down if you or someone you know and love can benefit from talking to someone on the other end of these phone numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully, we delivered our message. We really wanted to raise awareness
Yeah.
regarding child suicide. I know some of you are wondering why a 10-year-old would even have the thought, but you have
Mm-hmm.
to remember, in this age of technology,
Mm-hmm.
they're getting exposed to all manner of things, including things like how to commit suicide,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, and we talked about how the underdeveloped or undeveloped mind really can't handle the stress. I mean, as adults, we're having a hard time handling the stress from the pandemic. So, imagine how the children feel. They're not in school, they can't socialize, and so on and so forth. So,
Yeah. Um, so my as I was preparing these slides and to prepare the talk, I really want to be a person who lives what I say. So my desire is to reach out to one new child every week, a child that I usually don't talk to in my settings, in my community, meaning my church community,
mm-hmm,
or even children who are my son's friends, just to say hi, how are you, just checking up on you. And if we could practice that with one child per week, we could, they can say, oh wow, you know, a lot of kids call me Auntie Mica. Auntie Mica cares about me, or Tati cares about me. She said hi to me this week. And you know, we underestimate these little things that we can
mm-hmm,
do.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
Brian, I want you to find one young person you can reach out to this week,
Okay.
whether it be in the family or outside of the family. And I want all of you viewers and listeners to just find one young person per week that you can reach out to. You don't have to harass them. Just say hi. Hey, I'm just saying hi. I was thinking of you today and I just wanted to say hello to you. And I think that'll make for a much
Yeah, I
better
agree.
world.
I agree. I think that is a good approach to help solve this problem.
Yeah.
Any questions from anyone, or any final comments from Dr. March or from Angela or even Pastor? Questions or comments?
All right. Well, if there are no questions, I checked the chat. I don't think there are any.
Check it again. Let's see. Yeah, I
Um,
don't see any.
yeah, I don't see any questions or comments. And so somebody said, I forgot what she said. Oh, she was saying somebody was commenting that some kids don't even have a computer, which is really sad. So
Mm-hmm.
the schools, I'm sure, are work on these disparities. That's what's happening in our communities of color. Some kids don't have computers or don't have means of accessing information, and so hopefully we're coming to a time where everyone will have that access.
Right.
That's our prayer, and that's our hope for everyone. So thank you so much, Angela, for joining us today. She's joining us from New Jersey. Thank you so much, Dr. Marsh, for joining us today. Thank you to all our viewers who came from near and far to join us today. Pastor, would you like to say a word for us in conclusion?
Well, folks, we want to thank you for joining Mika and Doc this evening. I hope you were blessed by the presentation. It sure is an eye opener to see what's going on. And we need to be concerned, about our young people, but especially the children in our homes. And we want to follow the advice to make home as, what's the term I'm looking for? As safe as possible. All right.
Yeah,
Hope my microphone wasn't too far.
as safe and as friendly as possible. Yeah. Thank you so much, Pastor. So we'd like to close with a prayer of consecration for our young people, especially those who are feeling sad today. Um, Pastor, if you can pray for our youth and for our young children who are feeling sad tonight, that would be great.
All right, let's do that. Father, thank you so much for Dr. Martin and his wife and their presentation on this very important topic. We want to remember the youth, Lord, that we're called to serve, those in our church community, those in our community, and those in our homes. We pray that you'll be with them and that you will bless and protect them. They have their lives ahead of them. We ask, Lord, that you will help us show them that their future is bright and they do not need to give up, because the truth is, COVID and all its challenges will eventually pass.
That's
And
right.
so we just ask that you will give us what we need to assist them. And then, Lord, I pray that you'll encourage and affirm and protect our youth and our children. And then we ask, Lord, that you will please forgive us of our sins and go with us through the days ahead. And we look forward to Dr. Brian and his wife coming back in 2 weeks to share again with us. Thank you so much for Dr. Marsh and for her input